Welcome to another Helios Sunrise interview. I'm joined today with Charles from Apex Loads. Charles joins the Incubator program, not a blockchain developer, right? Not having blockchain background experience, but having a very exciting, unique, interesting project and finding that there are some genuine utilities for smart contracts, for blockchain as part of the business. And, just to start us off, I think a lot of projects make the excuse that they're a Web3 project or a blockchain project just because they have some blockchain stuff. But what they don't have is a genuine business opportunity in the marketplace. So let's go through a little bit about your background and how you saw this opportunity that you've decided to pursue with Apex Loads.
Okay, so background on myself. So I'm an engineer by training. So I've worked in the industry for a couple of years, worked with Textron, Boeing, and I've also been a combat engineer in the military. But so when I was working at Boeing, I started to do a side hustle, and logistics is pretty great, because I've been hearing about kind of like the opportunities over there. So I started a small logistics company. And then after like 6 months, I had seen the potential because I was paying my driver more than I was making in my day job. And I was like, well, I have a license, so I might as well do myself. So I made a career switch. So you can imagine the conversation with my parents when I told them I'm quitting aerospace to go drive a truck. But I've never regretted it. It's fascinating because I get the like every day is a project. I pick up a load, I deliver it, mission accomplished. So I get that satisfaction at the end of every day or every other day. So, but I was born and raised in Kenya. So and I have people in logistics as well. And sometimes we compare notes, kind of like, hey, so how do you guys do this? And it was like mind-blowing to me to kind of like find out like what they're doing over there is what the US used to do like 20 years ago. So there's like a really huge gap. But the great thing about logistics is that it's universal. So like the solutions that would work in the US can easily work in Africa, and that allows them to leapfrog. You don't have to go through the whole 20 years of innovation. You can simply go from like A to Z. So, and that's kind of like how we came about with Apex Load. And our goal is that we're gonna close that logistics technology gap by simply adopting what works here. We're gonna tweak it a little bit to fit the market over there, but simply adopting what we have over here and implementing in Africa and other developing regions.
So maybe let's just touch on the potential size of the opportunity, just to try and give people a bit of perspective of, what kind of potential your business has, or the logistics marketplace in Africa. And then let's go and talk about the specific problems that you've seen in Africa that you think the best practice and the technology and the 20 years of development that the US has can address. So the market opportunity, the market size, and then the specific problem that you've seen in Africa.
So the good thing about Africa is that the industry is highly fragmented. Like, let's say if you compare here in the US, you're gonna have huge companies like JB Hunt or Prime or Swift, and these guys have like 25 or 50,000 trucks, and that's because they can operate seamlessly across the states. But whenever you go to Africa, so the states become countries. So it's the same difficulty a US company would have to working in Mexico, in Canada. So these guys just have that everywhere. So you're not gonna find a company as big. So what you end up having, instead of having one company that has 10,000 trucks, you're gonna have 1,000 companies with 10 trucks. So whenever we're looking at our load board, so our load board is subscription based. So the more people the more people they are, the better it is for us because we're trying to build that volume. And
So
like
just for the
Africa,
people that don't know what a load board is, just describe just basically what that does, what it's used for.
so a load board is pretty much a board, kind of like the history of it. So about 20 years ago or so here in the US, so how brokers and carriers would connect is that they would go to a truck stop and there'll be like a notice board. So brokers will go like kind of like using like put a notice on the board and say, hey, I have this load and going from whatever. And then the carriers will go there like in the morning and look at the board and see what's there. But 20 years ago, truck stop took that load board and made it online. So essentially a load board is where the cargo owners, they go post loads and then the carriers go search for the loads. And also carriers can post the available trucks and brokers or other cargo owners can go there and search for trucks.
And so to what extent does that exist currently in the African market?
So right now there is not a single independent load board. So the closest thing there is to a load board is a product by DHL. So DHL is a pretty known global freight forwarder, and they do have like an online platform where carriers who work with them, they can go on their website and book loads from there. You know, instead of like calling an agent in DHL, like you can simply go to this product by DHL. It's called Saludu, and you can simply book a load from them. But that load is only in-house. It's only for DHL cargo and DHL carriers, right? But there is not a single like independent where any cargo owner can go post loads or any carrier can go search for loads. So currently right now in Africa, we have a first to market advantage, but there are some indirect competitors because we kind of like, it's kind of like whenever you tell somebody and you're like, hey, are you like Sandy? I'm like, no, we're not. So that kind of like makes them our indirect competitor because we're getting confused with them. And what I mean by that, so the indirect competitors, they're simply online brokers. So these are brokers that get contracts from shippers because let's say a shipper ships 10 loads a day, right? That shipper does not want to deal with 10 trucks every single day. So what they do, they just outsource that work to a broker, and then the broker handles that for a commission, right? And that's what kind of like a new startups are doing right now. So they do have some control of the cargo. You know, that's where we overlap because our platform allows shippers to bypass brokers, and if they want to deal with carriers, they can simply bypass them and post their loads directly and deal directly with the carriers if that's what they want to do. So that's kind of like the narrow place where we overlap. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that's good product detail for people that are not like super interested in the logistics business. Let's talk around that then. You found a very interesting statistic that still sticks in my mind about how much waste happens because of poor logistics. What we're talking about is being able to connect a one side of the economy that has products that need to be moved and delivered, and the other side that is looking for that opportunity to carry cargo to the next destination. So it's matching, it's pairing those two sides of the marketplace. And because of the problem that you found is everywhere in Africa by the sounds of it, without having this load board solution that is standard practice in the US, you found that there's a lot of waste happening in Africa. Tell us how you found that. What was that statistic, and what does that really mean to you or to that perspective about the business opportunity?
So the biggest thing, it's always like food. You know, every time you hear Africa, you're probably gonna hear in a context where people are starving in Africa, right? But UN did this study where they found out that 50% of all agricultural produce in Africa goes to waste, and this is due to an inefficient supply chain, whether it's due to a lack of a cold chain infrastructure, or just simply the market did not get to the product did not get to market in time. And so this is enough to feed 300 million people. Like, we can feed that the stuff that is getting wasted is enough to almost feed the whole of the US, which is ridiculous when it's a problem that can easily be solved by simply providing a platform for people to connect more easily.
Okay, so
And
to help make that concrete for people, for example, I've got a big giant truck full of perishable goods. We're talking about fruits and vegetables, probably, essentially, right? There might be other stuff
right.
as well, but fruit and vegetable, massive trucks. I arrive somewhere in a major African area. Maybe tell us about, just touch on the zones that you're looking to do business in at the moment. And then I'm looking for another truck that will take my cargo and ship it to the next destination. Is that correct?
Yes. So what happens, let's say here in the US, that is something that you're supposed to know beforehand, kind of like, let's say, for instance, space is a really huge, it's really expensive, let's say, for a manufacturer. Like, so if you're manufacturing something, you don't want to worry about space. So what they do, like, you want to coordinate such, whenever your product is ready, there's already somebody waiting to ship it. That way you don't have to rent a warehouse, right? So, like, that's something that, like, here in the US, they've got a really good about it, because I remember there's some shippers that you might go to pick up a load and say, hey, just give us 10 minutes, it's not ready. So those guys have it set that by the time the product is ready, somebody's waiting to ship it. But in Africa, what happens is that when stuff is ready, that's when people start finding trucks, because that's the only way to do it. Like, there's no way to coordinate ahead of time. And what happens, kind of like, so the biggest thing is kind of perishable goods, because first of all, there is no cold chain. So if you're a small farmer and you harvest like 10 crates of potatoes or 10 crates of tomatoes, they need to get to the market before they go bad, right? So if you have to wait a whole week before you find a truck, then half of it is gonna go bad. And that's kind of like a really huge problem. Like, I remember, so there's this one time whenever we were doing a customer discoveries. So our main focus is we're gonna start in East Africa. So we did a market customer interviews in Kampala, and I can explain what chose Kampala. But I remember we were talking to this broker, and they're shipping maize to South Sudan. South Sudan is heavily affected by hunger, and this broker was frustrated because people are starving, and he has the maize, but he cannot find a truck to get it to them. Yes, there's some government issues, obstacles to that. Something about like security and all that kind of stuff. So there's still other obstacles. But just simply the fact that he cannot find a truck to go take the food, that's kind of like the biggest obstacle that he has to overcome. And then you go to another truck stop, literally like 20 kilometers from that guy, find a transporter that has like 2 or 3 trucks. And the biggest concerns are like, how there's so many trucks and we can't find cargo. And I was like, wait a minute. I just talked to a guy like an hour from here who has an opposite problem. But since these guys you can't just find out, hey, find a carrier. So they have to rely on building a network by word of mouth. Or, hey, I've worked with Gabriel before, so next time I can call him. But building such a network will take you years. And let's say, okay, I have 5 transporters that are my go-to guys. But if those transporters are covered, let's say you get a transporter that goes from Kampala to Kenya, it's gonna be at least 2 weeks before they come back. So they're not good. They're not used for you. So what these brokers like, so we were asking them, hey, so what happens when all your go-to guys are covered? Well, I just have to give up the load or send it to one of my friends who's a broker. So just that limitation is insane, because so two of the problems that causes failure among small logistics company is that access, where you have the guy with two trucks doesn't have enough cargo, and the broker with cargo doesn't have access to the trucks. But the issue is not like you're saying, like it's not like a lack of either. There's plenty of cargo, there's plenty of trucks. They just can't find each other. And that's the problem that we're trying to fix.
Yeah, and to quantify that, I think you had a couple of statistics about how much money or revenue or Chinese investment that is looking to happen in the region. Maybe you can remember some of those statistics, but in essence, it's like we're talking about the continent of Africa having this
Right.
problem, and that is a big chunk of the global economy, right?
So over the last decade, like Western countries, especially due the demand for like electric vehicles, like Africa is really huge with natural resources, like all the minerals. I'm pretty sure you've heard about Congo and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing about Congo is that like there's a lot of resources there, but they're not accessible because there's no roads. So over the last 10 years, there has been huge investments. One notable one is China. A lot of people have kind of like mixed feelings about how they're actually doing it, but at the end of the day, they've identified the opportunity. So what China is doing, they're renovating like seaports, they're renovating airports, they're building highways, they're building roads to open up these markets. Like I say, Congo, it's really huge. Whether it's the lumber, the forest, they have a lot of lumber. So whenever it comes to building, minerals, oil, so they have a lot of resources. But when those markets get open up, so it's gonna explode. So there's gonna be kind of like a new resources. Like farming is a really huge thing, especially now, when people are realizing like, hey, our wheat comes from Ukraine, so where is it gonna come from now? There's a lot of that stuff in Africa, but now if like so once we make that accessible, and once we know that, hey, because our goal by closing that technology gap, we want to make sure that a carrier in Kenya can be able to work with a broker from the US, because once we establish that standard, like I said, like logistics is global. So if I'm talking to Gav and Gavin is in Mexico, I know if I tell Gav, hey, I need a rate confirmation. Like if you're here logistics in the US, everybody knows. So if you're in the US, Mexico, and Canada, you know what a rate confirmation is. You know what a broker agreement is. You know what a BOL is. So based out of US, I've worked with brokers in Canada, I've worked with brokers in Mexico, simply because we have that standard. And if we can establish that standard in Africa, especially now Africa is serving a global market, it's gonna be super easy for these guys to kind of like have access to that. Not only the African market, but they're gonna be able to do their exports directly.
And you're not just a man with a plan. You don't just have an idea that you haven't just identified this gap and thought about, hey, maybe it would be good if we had a load board. You've actually developed the platform already, right? So give us a little picture, maybe not explain every detail, but where are you in terms of the vision of what the software needs to be able to do? Basically, what can it do today, and what is the next step functionality that you think you need to add to it?
So, like I say, so we did develop. The funniest thing, like I didn't have a huge background whenever it comes to startups and all that kind of stuff. So whenever I identify that problem, it's kind of like, hey, so I was thinking of as an engineer, like, hey, okay, how do we solve this? And like, oh, we need a platform, so that means we need to find a developer. So we found a developer and developed the platform. But now whenever we launch, and I was kind of like the biggest thing was kind of like the marketing cost, because it's really expensive, and it's kind of like we're having to backtrack. Like I make fun of it because like at the beginning of this year I didn't even know what a pitch deck was, but so it has been a lot of backtracking, but we're doing great. So right now, where the platform is that like it can do the basic thing or what we're trying to do. Like the key features, the functionalities that we're giving our users, they can be able to use the platform efficiently. And currently right now we have 2,200 users. And so the biggest thing about a marketplace, or whenever you put in two people together, you first of all, you gotta have the people to put together, right? So we needed to spend some time to build the network. That way I can guarantee you, like, hey, Gabriel, if you post a load, you're gonna find a truck, within like 5 or 10 minutes. So just having numbers is not enough. Like those users also have to be on the same trade route, or the same trade region. Like, so whenever you're looking at East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, almost all the cargo happens in 4 hubs. So you have Mombasa in Kenya, Nairobi, Kampala, and Dar es Salaam. So one of our biggest milestone, one of our key milestone was to have 1,000 users in these 4 hubs. That way I know if I have at least 250 users in each hub, I know I can guarantee you a match. And we were able to exceed that. So now we have about like 300 to 500 users in each of these hubs. So now the next thing is kind of like build that engagement. So that's where we are. But right now, the next thing, kind of like to improve any process, you have to standardize it. Like first of all, standardize it, and that's how you can be able to improve on it. Like incorporate, insurance requirements. Say, hey, what insurance requirement have you guys worked with? Like, so we identify big brokers, like Borode is one of the biggest, freight forwarders in East Africa. And it's simply approaching these guys. Say, hey, you are Borode. What are the insurance requirements that you need a transporter to have for them to carry your load? And if we know, like, hey, if you're a transporter and you can meet this insurance requirement, you can pretty much work with any freight forwarder in East Africa. And once we establish those standards, then it's gonna be much easier to find matches, because like, hey, Gav can work with any transporter. And Charles, I know, hey, any transporter on Apex Load, they meet all the requirements. So once we get them together, the next thing is to introduce that standard, and then they just keep improving on it.
Got you. Tell us a little bit. You mentioned yourself as a space engineer, right? What else? Like, you've got to have a certain attitude to be a founder. What was the attitude that you had when you decided to begin Apex Loads? And tell us a little bit more about the team, a couple of the key people on your team. Who are they? What do they do? What are you learning? What are the challenges that you find that you have to face as being a new startup founder?
So the biggest thing, even being, I grew up in Africa, and kind of like parents over there always driving you like, hey, you gotta go to school to be an engineer, to be a doctor, and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty common. And we did all that, kind of like went and did aerospace. I was working for Boeing, which is, the best aerospace company in the world, so it was pretty great. But my thing, what excites me is solving problems, like solving problems, like everyday problems. Whenever somebody made this comment, I don't know who I should give it credit to. Like, whenever you look at startups in the US, they're essentially trying to save people money, like all the little basic stuff have been figured out. So now startups are simply trying to save people money. But whenever you're a startup in Africa, you solving a real need. Like your startup is probably trying to feed people. You're trying to bring people into the market. Like, because right now, 80% of the economy in Africa is informal. People don't even have bank accounts. So which is kind of like why you can see a lot of fintechs pop up. But so whenever we started about developing, so I needed to find a developer. And so whenever I started to find a developer here in the US, I would get quoted anywhere from like 25,000 or 50,000, which we couldn't afford at the time. So we ended up outsourcing, and we outsourced it to an outfit in Kampala. So Osba, he's our CTO, who's kind of like he's kind of like the leader of Kesho Concepts. So it's a development team out of Kampala, and their team pretty much built Apex Load from the ground up. So if anybody would ask me, hey, who's your co-founder? You know, he's the closest thing to being a co-founder because he knows about it as much as I do. And then and he also has some startups experience. He's worked with a telemedicine startup in Kampala called Rocket Health, and they're doing pretty amazing. Because I remember actually when I was in Kampala, it was the time of COVID where for you to travel, you have to do a COVID test. And what Rocket Health does is that they'll bring the lab to you. They'll come to your hotel and collect your sample and then email you, like they'll email you the results, which is pretty awesome. Like, you know, it saves you a lot of time there. So they're doing pretty great. So he was working with them and kind of like brought some of that expertise at Apex Load. We have Kara. So Kara is a part of digital marketing. So she does our social media, and she literally grew our Facebook, like for instance, Facebook from 0 followers to like almost 600, you know, grew Instagram from like 0 to like 5,000, all organic. You know, our Twitter is also like in the thousands. So she's pretty good about that. And the next biggest thing was marketing. So we have to have like a marketing lead in each country. And so we have Gordon. Gordon also has a marketing agency called Media Hut. And the reason why we had to go with third parties is that we can right now leverage their networks. Instead of bringing somebody in-house and training them, I can already take advantage of like Gordon, you know, he understands the market in Kenya, so I can simply leverage that. And he's our marketing lead in Kenya. So we have Oliver. Oliver is our marketing lead in Tanzania, and he's pretty connected with the media. You know, so he was like, hey Charles, you know, I have friends, you know, we're gonna get you like 30 minutes of airtime where we can invite you for an interview and you can talk about Apex Load and all that kind of stuff. So the next time I'm in Tanzania, that's why I'm trying to do a few TV interviews. So he's pretty well connected as well. And then we have Jalia. Jalia, she's our marketing lead in Uganda. And we have Andrew. So Andrew is kind of like on an advisor capacity. So he's a transport manager in Kenya, and his company manages 160 trucks. So he's kind of like the guy that keeps us appraised of what's happening, you know, the new trends, you know, like, hey, and he's also the guy referring to us, hey, you need to talk to this guy, you know, he does this and this and that, or you need to talk to this broker. So he does those introductions for us, and then I usually call them up, tell them what we're doing, and kind of like trying to sign them up. But yesterday, actually, last night, we found our first investor. So that was that was pretty good.
Really?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Congratulations. So let's just take a pause there.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing about the team is that you've been very selective about the people that you brought on. And I think from our conversations that has evolved. I think originally you were thinking of having a generic marketing manager, right? I think that was on your budget plan. And now it seems like you're selecting external people who have a very specific awareness of their market, of the skills that they have. And you also said that at the beginning of the year, you didn't even know what a pitch deck was, right? So tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the incubator. Very interested to hear whatever you're able to share about this investor. And then you've also just recently been accepted onto another incubator. Take us from the Helios incubator experience to these new updates, whatever you can share about them.
Yeah, so kind of like as far as the recruiting part, right? So what we kind of like noticed later on is the cultural differences. Like whenever you look at, you know, Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, they are right next to each other. So like if you're here in the US, you know, you'd be talking about Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas, you know, and there's not really that much of a difference. like whatever you see in Oklahoma is gonna be the same thing you see in Kansas. But what we realize is kind of like, especially Tanzania, they're not really huge English speakers, so like a platform translation, that's something that we also looking into. And one of the suggestions is kind of like we made like a demo. I think I showed this to you at the beginning about what Apex Load is, and we translated that into Swahili, and we got really good feedback about that. So here in the beginning, it's really crucial for us to have a really solid foundation, and and having people from those cultures that completely understand the logistics market. Like Oliver, he does marketing, but he's also a broker on the side. So I don't have to tell him like, hey, this is what brokers do. Like he's like, bro, yeah, this is a great idea, So he already has the buy-in, and that kind of like helps us in the beginning. Yes, eventually we're gonna have like a VP of marketing, and that's kind of like the guy who's gonna be selling the KPIs for these guys. Hey, this is the direction and all that kind of stuff. But right now in the beginning, so we gotta have like those people who are deeply rooted, so we can build that foundation up. Anyway, so as far as kind of like our evolving from not knowing what a pitch deck was, I would say like the last few months have been quite a journey, and a lot of these things, they may seem, like basic or trivial, like anybody should know what a pitch deck is, like anybody should know what an investor deck is, but we didn't know that. But because kind of like for instance the incubator, so what I liked about it is kind of like they're not telling us like, hey, this is what you do and all that kind of stuff. It's more like they're encouraging you to develop yourself. They're asking the right question, kind of like I really appreciate an incubator for that. It's kind of like, hey Charles, what are you doing about this? And whenever whenever you ask good question, you kind of like, even though you have the answer, you now kind of like able to answer that question. It's kind of like whenever you're saying, hey, whenever you're stating your problem, you need to simplify, kind of like don't be too complex. You need to be succinct. Now I know that word, like from Gav always repeating it. You have to be succinct. Like these guys don't have time for you, like you're trying to get that meeting, and then like whenever you get a follow-on, then you can go into details. So that has been really huge. And us knowing, okay, what are investors looking for? What are the questions I need to answer? And one of the things that was particularly helpful, even though I mean it's a little frustrating whenever your pitch deck gets rated and you get a 3, and you're like, gosh, yeah, I need to go home. But what that gives you is kind of like, hey, if you don't take it personal, it's a really huge, asset to have. Because a lot of people are not willing to do that. Like let's say like incubator, you want your founders to be happy, that way they can give you great reviews. But I think getting good results is far more outweighs that. And I think our investor deck or our investment is way better just from getting that hard critique. Like, hey, Charles, this is great, but you can definitely be better. And this is what you need to improve in. And kind of like just learning, not just the slides, you always gotta look at your energy. You gotta consider building your credibility. You gotta make sure you have all the psychological aspects in it. So that's one great thing like I haven't seen from another accelerator. Like we did another accelerator before Helios, and it's kind of like the basic cookie cutter, like, hey, you gotta have this slide. One talks about problem, solution, and market, something that I can easily Google, or find from YouTube. But that understanding even the psychology behind it, like, why do you have to be succinct? You have to be succinct because of this, why do you have to include something that shows credibility? Because yeah, these guys don't know you, and that's a really huge thing to have credibility, because like, I don't know these guys, so why would I give him 50K, so whenever you're developing your deck and have this at the back of your mind, it kind of like helps you kind of like guide you through whatever you're supposed to have. So it's been invaluable. And I mean, honestly, it's kind of like what helped us get that first investor. So we actually met last night. It was at a kickoff event for that new incubator. So I didn't even know he was an investor. So we were just talking. It's kind of like I just met a guy with a baseball cap, and it's like, hey, so what do you do? But just from knowing, like, hey, I've pitched this like every week for the last 6 weeks, so it's kind of like automatic, like so you gotta start with your one-liner. You gotta go to the problem. You gotta go to the solution, and kind of like show them the market and how you're better. And he was like saying, "Oh, I like your pitch," and I was like, "Oh, I wasn't even pitching." This we were just having a conversation.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, so it was fascinating, because whenever he said, "I liked your pitch," and I was like, I wasn't even pitching. I was just kind of like walking you through what we're building and why, and kind of like the opportunity. So he ended up being an investor. So he's a founder himself, and we're kind of like, so kind of like going over the step, kind of like what you've been drilling, like, hey, what do you need to get to the next milestone? Like, I know you asking for $1 million, but what do you need to get to that next milestone? I was kind of like, so for us, the platform is free right now, right? Because we had to build that network. But right now, so I was like, hey, so right now we're burning like 5 to 7,000 a month, and we need to get to January before we turn our paywall. And he's like, so 20K will get you to there, like, he's like, yeah, that would be a great help. So I'm like, yeah, I can give you 20K. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. And so he goes like, so what can you give me for 20K? And I was like, well, that's a really good question. So what else can you offer other than the money? And and that's another thing, kind of like from the incubator, because it's not just the money, right? You got to look at somebody's culture and the value that they're bringing to you. You don't want just somebody to give you a check and then like, oh, that's the end of it. But so the guy, so he's a former CEO of a bank. So, and I was kind of like walking him through the part two of a solution, which is invoice factoring. And it's like, oh yeah, invoice factoring. I have a couple guys who do invoice factoring here in the US. And I'm like, oh my God, I will give you equity just for the introduction to those guys, because in 2 years' time, I would say 70 to 80% of our revenue is gonna come from invoice factoring, and we can also kind of like go deep into that and how it works. So he's gonna bring a lot of value to us, and kind of like also gives us the means to hit our next milestone. Because if we can hit that, the value of our company goes up significantly. So it's gonna be it's been really great.
Look, it's been a pleasure to have you in the incubator program, and I think Waxer and Chris Barnes will be very excited to hear that you've been able to take what you've got. I remember our first couple of calls, and you had a presentation. It wasn't a pitch deck, but it was a presentation about Apex loads, and I remember just kind of not suffering listening to you, but knowing that I can see the business opportunity here, but it's not at all ready to pitch as an investment to investors, right? And that's part of the challenge that so many founders have. You do have good ideas, but it's the communication piece, and it's refining, and it's that psychology like you've addressed just now. And so I think Brock Pierce will be very interested to hear as well, that because he's particularly interested, Brock Pierce, the sponsor of Helios, for those that don't know, he's very passionate about logistics. He's mentioned that's a really important service to the world to support the transition that we have to go through from the old way of doing things to a new way of doing things. And you've taken that, you've packaged it, you've made it your own. You got accepted to another incubator, and you just told us now that you've actually got a first investor who has a CEO of a bank, very business savvy, financial savvy, and he's got connections to invoice factoring experts. So you're well on your way, and it's really thrilling to hear all of that, Charles. So look, when you're the billionaire CEO, promise that you'll come back and do another interview with me for the Helios audience. So maybe after the next maybe after the next incubator program that you're going to go through, maybe once you've got a next milestone of traction or your new feature, your new roadmap figured out, come back and give us an update. And I look forward to progressing with the Helios Accelerator, hopefully in the future, that we can provide to Apex Loads as well. Any closing thoughts? Round up.
So one thing I would like to thank you, well, first of all, for the opportunity, but particularly I remember this from the beginning, whenever we did our second interview, and you're like, hey, Charles, we're the EOCIO, ecosystem. So you've got to figure out a way to incorporate that, and that was a really great idea, because what we identify, like here in the US, you have the FMCSA, which is kind of like the government part, the department that kind of like handles commercial work. So if you're driving a commercial truck, you gotta have a DOT and DOT number. And if you're doing any interstate work, you gotta have an MC. So whenever it comes to verifying credibility, that's something that can really be done with Web 2. But whenever you look at Africa, they don't have that. It's kind of like the Wild West. So one main thing. So our users, obviously, they're not gonna know what blockchain is. If you ask any broker or truck driver in Africa, they're not gonna know what a blockchain is. But whenever you look at the issues that they're dealing with, that credibility, knowing like, hey, I'm working with these guys, and once I deliver a load for him, I'm gonna get paid. Or I'm working with each transporter, and once I give him a load, he's not gonna run away with it. So those are some of the things that a blockchain kind of like enables that. So even though they're not gonna know, like they don't care about what a blockchain is, just us giving them that platform or that capability, it's gonna be a game changer over there. So I do appreciate you for, like I said, the good questions. So it was really great. It was really good, and I'm thankful we got the chance to do the program. And I would definitely recommend anybody who is doing any Web3 to hit you up. So
on that note, Charles, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for the interview, your time, and good luck with the incubator. And I look forward to speaking again in due course.
Sounds good. Thank you, man, and have fun in Mexico.
Thank you, Charles. Take care.